Welcome to the FASA Leadership Lounge, where we are going to dive in and discuss various policies impacting Florida school leaders. I am Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I am Jessica Janisiewicz, and I serve as the lobbyist for FAFSA and a number of school districts here in Florida. We have a number of topics to cover today at both the state and national level.
Absolutely. So we're going to start and talk about the federal level because there's some big deadlines looming, certainly about the budget. So last week we had the opportunity to participate in a meeting with NASSP, which is our secondary school principals organization, and some other state executives. So during this call, it gives Jessica and I the opportunity to share what's happening with policies in Florida, hear what's happening in other states, and then, of course, get very timely national updates, which, of course, we can bring to you today. So currently, Congress is facing the September 30th deadline to pass a budget or a continuing resolution before a government shutdown happens. The House and the Senate have very different approaches, of course, to how to fund education and a number of other things. For instance, in Title II, the House completely eliminates the funding, whereas the Senate is holding the funding at this same level next year as this year.
They definitely have some different ideas, and the differences matter a lot for K 12 education. The big theme is this: how much more money are schools going to get, and whether smaller targeted programs survive or if they get rolled into bigger block grants.
Absolutely. So here's kind of the breakdown. The White House is pushing for cuts and consolidation. Basically, take a bunch of smaller programs, things like English language acquisition and migrant education, and fold them into bigger, simplified grants. That could mean less funding overall and less money earmarked for students who need specific support. The Senate is taking a different approach. They want to mostly protect those programs and keep funding levels close to where they are now, with maybe some modest increases. And then there's the House, where the plan looks closer to the White House version, but includes deeper cuts overall, more consolidation, and about a 7% reduction in education funding compared to the Senate's bill.
So let's put some numbers on that. Between the White House and the Senate versions, there's about a $5 billion swing in the K 12 formula funding. That's money that goes straight to schools for things like Title I, English language learner programs, and after school services.
And speaking of after school, one of the programs at risk is the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program, the one that funds after school and summer programming. If that gets cut or folded into a block grant, districts could lose a lot of the money they use to keep kids engaged outside of regular school hours.
So, what does this mean for schools? If the Senate plan wins out, districts can probably count on stable funding for another year. But if the White House or the House version carries more weight, districts that rely on targeted grants for migrant students, English learners, rural programs, etc., could take a real hit.
And let's not forget about inflation. Even the Senate's stable plan isn't really keeping up with rising costs. So, in terms, some schools might feel like they're doing more with less.
So, where do things stand now? Well, negotiations are still underway. And if lawmakers cannot agree by October 1st, we'll probably see a continuing resolution. That would keep funding at the current levels for a while, basically kicking the can down the road.
Either way, the fight is not over, and it's definitely one to watch closely. The final decision could reshape not just how much money schools get, but how flexible or restrictive that money is.
Our NASSP counterparts are continuing to push for more funding for K 12 education, and they're pushing against cuts to federal programs. We'll certainly keep following it and let you know how it all plays out.
Absolutely. And watch for some calls to action from NASSP, even NAESP and FASA as it relates to that. So let's talk rulemaking at the state level because there's a little bit to cover. So this week on September 24th, which is Wednesday, the Florida State Board of Education will meet and look to adopt 7 proposed rule changes. A few of these rules to be considered at the meeting are related to legislation passed last year, specifically around epinephrine auto injectors and diabetes management. These policies are also going to require additional protocols to be developed at the district level. The other one that's also following language from last session, the board will review proposed language relating to schools of hope and the criteria that will allow them to access underused, vacant, or surplus facilities within school districts. It also addresses the dispute resolution process between those schools and our school districts.
Another rule impacting the principles of professional conduct for educators in self-reporting an arrest or felony misdemeanor offense within 48 hours will be looked at during this time as well. This proposed rule specifically says that a supervising administrator has to cooperate with all investigations that are conducted by the Florida Department of Education. The state board will also review an appeal regarding conversion charter schools, turnaround options for schools, and the designations of schools of excellence, as well as academically high performing school districts.
The department also has an additional 32 rules still open for development, and some already have drafted language posted. Some of those topics include revisions to the Florida Educator Accomplished Practices, approval of teacher prep programs, and the teacher prep uniform curricula and courses. And there's also a focus, certainly in these rules, on exceptional student education and school readiness.
We also wanted to share an update on what is happening with the policy discussions around vaccine mandates in schools. We've heard from the Florida Surgeon General, Ladepo, who has called for an end to all mandates. Some of these mandates are in Florida statutes and therefore would require legislative changes, and then some are in rule. Those that are in rule include the chickenpox vaccine, flu type B vaccine, pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, and hepatitis B vaccine. The Florida legislature would have to repeal any mandates that are in law. So for school kids, that includes the DTaP, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and acticellular phthisis, the MMR, as we know it, the measles, mumps, and rubella, and then the polio vaccines. Those are all in statute. The proposed rule development has been filed by the Florida Department of Health and will work through that process. As of right now, there are no upcoming rulemaking meetings that have been announced, but we will keep tracking this and we'll certainly share updates as soon as we have them.
Absolutely. And it's important to note that not everyone seems to be on board with these proposed changes. So even inside the Republican Party, not everyone is sold on wiping out Florida's vaccine requirements. In fact, there's been some pretty notable pushback. So Senator Rick Scott, for instance, he jumped in early to distance himself from Governor DeSantis and our Surgeon General. He pointed out that Florida already gives families options with religious and personal belief exemptions. He says that the balance and getting rid of the mandates altogether could throw that balance off. Then there's State Senator Don Gates. He's not shutting the door on the idea, but he's certainly made it clear that any change needs to be based on what he calls valid and reliable evidence. Translation: show him the science before asking him to jump in.
State Senator Gail Harrell has a similar vibe. She hasn't taken a firm stance yet, but she said that she wants to see details first. And importantly, she is on record already saying that she supports vaccines in general. So she's signaling caution about broad rollbacks. And over in the state house, Representative Michael Owen is trying to thread the needle. He's all for parental choice, but he also wants to make sure that certain vaccines, the big ones that protect against serious diseases, that there are safeguards still in place for those. His message was basically, let's don't throw out the whole system without looking closely at the consequences.
So the bottom line is that the debate over vaccines in Florida is far from over. The executive branch can make some changes on its own through rulemaking, but when it comes to what's written in state law, the legislature is going to have the final word. And they could go even further, not just weighing in, but potentially rolling back or reshaping whatever changes come out of the rulemaking process.
We are also already starting to see bills being filed for the 2026 legislative session. In fact, just this week, Representative Dan Daly has refiled legislation. So this year it will be House Bill 23, which is aimed at enhancing safety training for Florida teachers. This bill mandates that all educators receive specialized training to handle mass casualty events, ensuring that they can recognize warning signs and take appropriate actions to protect students and staff. As a graduate himself of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, Representative Daly's focus is to make sure that all teacher certification routes incorporate mass casualty incidents training into their educator preparation programs. If the bill were to be passed, it would take effect on July 1st, 2026.
There's also a number of other bills already filed, and they cover a wide range of topics. One that is kind of on the lighter side, not so heavy, is, and it keeps coming back year after year, and new legislators keep filing this bill. It's relating to changing the state bird. So currently, the mockingbird is not only the state bird in Florida, but a large number of other states. And legislators have talked about being unique and having something that is unique to Florida. So, House Bill 11 suggests the American flamingo as the official state bird and the scrub jay as the state songbird. On a more serious note, though, we do have some that will impact education. Uh, Senator Sharif has filed Senate Bill 54 on the use of substances affecting cognitive function. So, this bill defines the terms of mass shooting and psychotropic drug. It requires school safety specialists to provide teachers with certain training on the adverse effects of these drugs, illicit drugs, and controlled substances. The bills also have other requirements for law enforcement and medical examiners as well relating to those terms.
And while we're just at the start of bills being filed, we are already expecting somewhere between 100 and 300 education focused bills this session. But of course, it's not just policy that lawmakers tackle during session. The one thing the legislature is mandated to do every year is to build the budget. And on Friday, September 12th, the state released the Long Range Financial Outlook, or LRFO. Think of this as the first of many signals that help us predict what the budget might look like for the coming year. It's an early snapshot, kind of like a financial weather report for Florida schools and state programs. So before we talk about that, let's rewind just a bit. Back in 2024, Florida's long range financial outlook was already throwing up some red flags. It showed big general revenue shortfalls coming down the line. And what we recognized as a result is that lawmakers were probably going to tighten the belt in 2025 and 2026. And sure enough, that is exactly what happened. The budget for this school year shows it quite clearly. The 2024 outlook had assumed that schools would get around 4.2% in a per funding student increase, which has been the historical average. Instead, what we ended up with is districts only getting about 1.6% of an increase. On top of that, with the growth in the family empowerment scholarship students, both kids that are leaving public schools and kids who were never in them to begin with, that meant that traditional school districts saw almost $385 million less in total state funding this year compared to last year. And now, with more students expected to leave in the 25-26 school year, the financial squeeze is only getting worse. So, looking ahead, the recently released 2025 financial outlook is not much brighter, unfortunately. Yes, the first year shows a slight surplus, but after that, the numbers just tank. By 2028-29, the state is projecting a shortfall of about $6.6 billion. And that is after those cost cutting strategies that lawmakers rolled out this year. For schools, that likely means smaller per student funding increases. They have built just about 3% into the forecast, which is lower than the historical trend and well below inflation, of course. The bottom line is there's nothing in this outlook that suggests the numbers are going to be any better this year. District leaders are going to need to take a hard look at their budgets and make some big picture changes now in order to keep their finances stable for the long haul. Of course, there are many other factors that could take place during this interim period before they build the budget, depending on what happens globally and nationally with the economy. So we will certainly stay on top of this and provide updates as we work through the legislative session so that as our members, you are able to have a good idea of what to expect for the next budget cycle.
Absolutely. And I would stress too how important the voice of our school leaders is in today's times. So, again, we talked about that call to action at the federal level. Make sure that right now you're getting to know your legislators. Invite them to come to your school. Consider the fact that October is National Principals Month, and we would love for our legislators to be able to come and experience what's happening in our schools. Invite them to be a principal for the day, and encourage you all to get engaged and to share your story of those impacts at your school level. You are doing the amazing work. We certainly appreciate that and look forward to sharing how FASA is going to approach a lot of these issues as we move forward and work with our legislative committee. We encourage you to stay updated and share with us some topics that maybe you're wondering about and or hearing about through other resources, and we would love to be able to talk about them on our podcast. Thank you, as always, for listening. Make sure you tell your colleagues about where to find the latest episode of the Leadership Lounge. And of course, just know that our advocacy page on our website is continuing to be updated and grow each week. So the full list of bills will be there. We look forward to sharing more updates, so stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michelle White and Jessica James-Seals. The podcast was produced by Jeff Willoughby. Original musical recordings by David Higgins. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topics, suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@fasa.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.